Welcome, weary traveller. You've found your way to Sleepless Survivors, where ancient mysteries meet the calm embrace of rest. Tonight we journey together beyond the edge of the known world, to a place whispered about in the oldest texts and the most secretive traditions, a land that exists somewhere between memory and myth, between ice and imagination. Close your eyes now if you haven't already. Let your breathing slow. Feel the weight of your body sinking deeper into comfort. Tonight you need not worry about tomorrow. Tonight you are safe, warm, and free to drift wherever this story takes you. We're going to Hyperborea, the frozen kingdom of the gods, the land beyond the north wind. Let yourself relax as we begin. Part 1. The Land Beyond the Wind. In the time before time was counted, before the great civilizations rose and fell, there existed a land so far north that the sun circled the horizon without ever setting, a place where winter reigned eternal, yet where life flourished in ways the warmer world could never imagine. The ancient Greeks called it Hyperborea, hyper meaning beyond, Boreas, the north wind, the land beyond the north wind, a realm that existed past the frozen breath of the god who brought winter to the Mediterranean. Breathe slowly now, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Feel yourself letting go of the day's tensions. The earliest mentions of Hyperborea come from fragments of text so ancient that they've been copied and recopied dozens of times over thousands of years. The poet Pindar, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, spoke of this northern paradise with a reverence reserved for the dwelling places of gods. He wrote that neither by ship nor on foot could you find the marvellous road to the gathering place of the Hyperboreans. Yet, he assured his readers, the Muses themselves loved this land, and Apollo, god of light and prophecy, visited there each year. Let your mind wander to this image, a land so remote that no ordinary means could reach it, yet a place the gods themselves frequented, where divine beings walked among a blessed people. The Hyperboreans, according to these ancient accounts, were a people who knew neither disease nor old age. They lived in perfect harmony for 1,000 years, their days filled with dance, music, and endless feasting. They knew no war, no conflict, no suffering. When their extraordinarily long lives finally reached their natural conclusion, they would adorn themselves with flowers and leap joyfully into the sea from a particular rock, embracing death as peacefully as they had embraced life. Breathe deeply. Let the peaceful image of this existence wash over you. A life without rush, without worry, without pain. The Greek historian Herodotus, often called the father of history, mentioned the Hyperboreans in his writings. Though sceptical of many mythological accounts, he recorded what others had said about this mysterious northern people. They lived, according to tradition, beyond the lands of the Scythians, past the Riphean mountains where the north wind was born. These mountains, the Riphean range, were said to be so tall that nothing beyond them could be seen. They formed a natural barrier between the ordinary world and the extraordinary realm of Hyperborea. Some accounts placed them at the edge of the earth itself, where the dome of the sky nearly touched the ground. Feel yourself travelling in your mind's eye, over familiar lands, past cities and farms, beyond the edge of civilization, further north, where the air grows crisp and cold, where forests thicken and thin again, where mountains rise like the spine of the world. According to legend, the Hyperboreans sent sacred offerings to the temple at Delos, the birthplace of Apollo. These gifts, wrapped in wheat straw, would pass from people to people, from the far north all the way to the Aegean Sea. Each community that received them would pass them along with a reverence, maintaining an unbroken chain from the land of myth to the world of men. The temple records at Delos, some claimed, showed these offerings arriving for generations until one day they simply stopped. Perhaps the Hyperboreans had withdrawn further into their isolation. Perhaps the chain of peoples had broken. Or perhaps the offering had served its purpose and was no longer needed. Let your breathing deepen. Feel yourself sinking further into relaxation. The Romans, inheritors of Greek knowledge, also spoke of Hyperborea. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, one of the most comprehensive encyclopedias of the ancient world, devoted passages to this legendary land. He described it as a place where the sun rose and set only once a year, creating 6 months of continuous daylight, followed by 6 months of darkness. This detail grounds the myth in a kind of reality, for indeed in the far Arctic regions the sun does behave in this way. During summer, it circles the sky without setting. During winter, darkness prevails for months at a time. The ancient writers, while speaking of a mythical land, were describing real phenomena that occurred in the barely known Arctic. Pliny wrote that in Hyperborea, the people sowed crops in the morning, harvested them at midday, picked fruit from their trees in the evening, and retreated to caves as night fell. The compression of time in this description mirrors the strange experience of Arctic summers, where the endless daylight seems to make time fluid and strange. Your eyelids are growing heavy now, your body is relaxing more and more deeply. Let the story carry you into rest. The Hyperboreans, according to these accounts, lived in sacred groves and forests. Their society was organised around the worship of Apollo, who would visit them each year. Some myths said he travelled there in a chariot pulled by swans, arriving just as the Pleiades constellation rose in the sky, marking the beginning of their sacred season. For 6 months, the Hyperboreans would sing hymns and perform ritual dances in honour of the sun god. The entire nation would become a choir, celebrating the light that never faded, the warmth that sustained them even in their northern home. And Apollo, delighting in their devotion, would play his lyre and dance among them until the season turned and he had to return to Delphi. Imagine the scene. An endless day stretching across months. A people united in constant celebration, their music rising into the bright sky. No darkness to bring fear, no cold to bring suffering, only light, warmth, and the presence of the divine. Your muscles are releasing their tension. Your jaw unclenches, your shoulders drop. You're safe here, listening, drifting. Some ancient sources claim that the first priests of Apollo at Delphi had come from Hyperborea. Pegasus and Aegeus, whose names were preserved in temple records, were said to have travelled from the far north to establish the oracle. They brought with them the traditions and wisdom of their people, teaching the Greeks how to properly worship the god of prophecy. Another Hyperborean, Abaris, was said to have travelled throughout Greece performing miracles and teaching philosophy. The most remarkable thing about Abaris was that he carried an arrow, given to him by Apollo, and this arrow allowed him to travel anywhere he wished without eating or drinking. He would ride upon this arrow, some said, flying through the air from place to place. The philosopher Pythagoras, founder of the mystical mathematical school that bore his name, was said to have met Abaris. According to the legends, Pythagoras showed Abaris his golden thigh, a mark of his own semi-divine nature, and Abaris immediately recognized Pythagoras as Apollo himself in human form. The two exchanged wisdom, and Abaris became a student of Pythagorean philosophy. Let these images drift through your mind like clouds. Don't hold on to them. Just observe them passing by as you sink deeper into comfort. The connection between Hyperborea and various mystery traditions ran deep through classical antiquity. The Orphic Mysteries, religious rites centred around the mythical poet Orpheus, contained references to northern lands of purity and light. Some scholars of these traditions believed that Orpheus himself had travelled to Hyperborea to learn the secrets of music and prophecy. The concept of Hyperborea represented something important to the ancient Mediterranean world. It was a place of perfection that existed just beyond reach, a reminder that somewhere, perhaps, there was a way of living that transcended the suffering and chaos of ordinary existence. Your breathing is slow and steady now, deep and peaceful. Each breath carries you further into relaxation. In the ancient texts, Hyperborea was often contrasted with Ethiopia, the far southern land where, according to Homer, the gods also loved to feast. The Greeks imagined the earth as a disk with the Mediterranean at its centre, and at the extreme north and extreme south existed these blessed lands where human beings lived in harmony with the divine. This symmetry appealed to the Greek love of balance and proportion. Just as there was a far south, there must be a far north. Just as the sun could shine endlessly on southern lands, so too must there be a northern realm where light prevailed. But Hyperborea was more than just a geographical concept. It represented a spiritual ideal, a place where human nature had not yet fallen, where the golden age of which the poet spoke had never ended. While the Mediterranean world struggled with war, plague, and the difficulties of civilization, the Hyperboreans continued their eternal festival, untouched by the passage of ages. Let yourself feel untouched by time. Let the concerns of your day dissolve. They cannot reach you here. The Roman poet Virgil, in his Eclogues, made reference to the Hyperborean hero. Though he did not elaborate extensively, the very mention of Hyperborea in poetry served to evoke a sense of noble antiquity and divine favour. It was a reference that educated readers would recognise, a shorthand for ultimate nobility and blessing. Later Roman writers continued to include Hyperborea in their encyclopedic works, even as the empire expanded northward and the geography of Europe became better known. Britain had been conquered, Gaul was familiar, and trade routes extended deep into what is now Germany. Yet Hyperborea remained unmapped, always just beyond the next horizon. This persistence suggests that Hyperborea had become something more than a place. It was an idea, a hope, a memory of something the human spirit yearned for, a land where life could be lived as it was meant to be lived, in joy and peace and communion with higher powers. Your thoughts are beginning to drift and blend. Images from the story mix with your own imagination. This is natural. This is the edge of sleep. Let yourself float here. Some ancient writers attempted to rationalise Hyperborea. They suggested it might be Britain or Scandinavia, or some other northern land that had been imperfectly described, but these rationalisations never quite satisfied. Britain, once visited, turned out to be real, with real problems and real people who suffered an age like everyone else. It was not the paradise of legend. The geographer Strabo, writing around the time of Christ, dismissed many of the tales of Hyperborea as fiction, yet even he could not completely discount the tradition. He noted that certain facts about far northern lands, the behaviour of the sun, the existence of peoples adapted to extreme cold, did align with the legends, even if the more fantastic elements did not. This tension between reality and myth characterises all of the ancient accounts. There was something real at the core of the legend, some truth about the far north that had become elaborated into a story of paradise. But what that core, truth was remained elusive. Breathe in, breathe out, feel the weight of your body. Feel yourself held safely by whatever you're resting upon. You are supported. You can let go. The mystery of Hyperborea deepened with the discovery of amber. This beautiful golden-orange stone, warm to the touch and capable of producing static electricity when rubbed, was highly prized throughout the ancient world. It was made into jewellery, amulets, and decorative objects. The Greeks and Romans knew that amber came from the north. Traders would bring it down through long overland routes from the Baltic Sea region, where it washed up on beaches after storms. The exact source was vague and mysterious to Mediterranean buyers, and some associated amber with Hyperborea. According to myth, amber was the tears of the Heliades, sisters of Phaethon who wept when their brother died trying to drive the chariot of the sun. But another tradition held that amber came from the far north, from Hyperborean lands, and was a gift of that blessed place to the wider world. The Amber Road, as it came to be called, was one of the most important trade routes in ancient Europe. It connected the Baltic to the Mediterranean across more than 1,000 miles. Along this route travelled not just amber, but ideas, stories, and perhaps some believed memories of Hyperborea. Let your mind wander along ancient trade routes. Imagine the merchants carrying their precious cargo south, telling stories around fires at night, tales growing in the telling, mixing truth with wonder. In the medieval period, memory of Hyperborea faded from common knowledge in Europe. The focus of mythology shifted to Christian themes, and the old Greek and Roman legends were mostly forgotten outside of monasteries where ancient texts were preserved. But the idea of a perfect northern land did not disappear entirely. It transformed. Medieval maps showed islands and kingdoms in the far north, terra septentrionalis incognita, the unknown northern land. Here be dragons, some maps noted, or stranger things. Norse mythology, which flowered in Scandinavia during the very period when classical learning was fading, contained its own versions of northern paradise. Asgard, home of the gods, was located in the celestial north. The world tree, Yggdrasil, had its roots in the north, and Valhalla, the hall of slain heroes, awaited warriors somewhere in those sacred northern realms. Were these Norse concepts entirely independent of Hyperborean tradition, or had some memory, some influence, travelled north along trade routes and become woven into Germanic storytelling? The question remains open. Cultures influence each other in ways that are difficult to trace across centuries. Your body is deeply relaxed now, your mind is quiet, you're listening but also drifting, both at once. This is perfect. This is exactly right. When classical learning revived during the Renaissance, scholars rediscovered the ancient texts that mentioned Hyperborea. They read Pindar and Pliny with fresh eyes, trying to understand what these ancients had known or believed about the world. Some Renaissance thinkers attempted to locate Hyperborea on modern maps. Could it be Iceland, discovered and settled by Norse explorers centuries before? Could it be some part of northern Russia or Siberia? Explorers were beginning to map these regions, and perhaps, some hoped, they would find traces of the ancient paradise. But as geography became more precise and scientific, the space for Hyperborea on physical maps disappeared. The Arctic was harsh, not paradisiacal. The peoples who lived there were hardy and resourceful, but they were not immortal philosopher-dancers living in endless summer. They were human beings struggling to survive in one of the planet's most challenging environments. Yet the idea would not die. Instead, it began to migrate from geography into philosophy and mysticism. Let go of the need to understand everything. Let the questions exist without answers. Rest is more important than resolution. In the 17th and 18th centuries, various esoteric traditions began to incorporate Hyperborea into their cosmologies. The Rosicrucians, a mystical order that may or may not have actually existed as an organisation, made references to ancient wisdom from the north. Alchemical texts occasionally mentioned Hyperborean knowledge as a source of their art. These references were usually vague and symbolic rather than literal. Hyperborea represented purity, ancient wisdom, and a golden age before the fall of humanity into materialism and spiritual darkness. It was an inner state as much as an outer place, a condition of consciousness that the initiate might achieve through proper training and dedication. The Freemasons, whose symbolism drew from many sources, incorporated elements that some traced to Hyperborean traditions. The emphasis on light, on the east and the north as sacred directions, on the recovery of lost wisdom, all resonated with Hyperborean themes even when not explicitly named. In this period, Hyperborea became part of the Western esoteric tradition. It joined Atlantis, Shambhala, and other legendary lands in the geography of the mystical imagination. These places represented stages of spiritual development, lost states of human consciousness, or dimensions of reality accessible only through inner transformation. Your conscious mind is fading now. Your unconscious mind is coming forward. This is natural and safe. This is the threshold of sleep. The 19th century saw an explosion of interest in mythology and ancient cultures. Comparative mythology emerged as a discipline, scholars analysing the similarities between the stories told by different peoples, and in this context Hyperborea came up repeatedly. Some theorists proposed that Hyperborea represented a folk memory of the Ice Age, when large parts of Europe were covered in glaciers and small bands of humans survived in ice-free, refugees. Perhaps they suggested there had been a particularly favourable location in the north, where one group had prospered, and the memory of this place had been passed down through dozens of generations, until it became mythologized as Hyperborea. Others looked to the mystery of the Indo-European peoples, the linguistic family that connected cultures from India to Iceland. These peoples had spread across Eurasia in prehistory, bringing with them a common linguistic heritage and certain shared mythological themes. Could Hyperborea represent the original homeland of these peoples before their dispersal? The Urheimat, as the original homeland was called, became a subject of intense scholarly debate. Some placed it in the steppes of Central Asia, others argued for Anatolia. But a persistent minority suggested a northern origin, somewhere in the region of the Baltic or southern Scandinavia. And if the Indo-Europeans had come from the north, could their cultural memory have preserved stories of this homeland as Hyperborea? These questions are for scholars, not for you tonight. Let them drift away. Numbers and theories dissolve into the darkness behind your eyelids. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw the rise of various occult movements that drew extensively on ancient mythology. Theosophy, founded by Helena Blavatsky, proposed a complex history of humanity involving multiple continents that had risen and fallen over millions of years. Hyperborea was one of these continents, home to the second root race of humanity, beings more ethereal than physical. In the theosophical cosmology, Hyperborea had existed at the North Pole during a time when Earth's geography was completely different. The people who lived there were in the process of developing physical bodies, evolving from purely spiritual beings into material forms. They represented an early stage in human evolution, one long past but not forgotten. This reinterpretation of Hyperborea as an evolutionary stage rather than a geographical location was typical of how esoteric movements handled ancient myths. The stories were true, they argued, but true in a symbolic and spiritual sense rather than a literal and historical one. Other occultists proposed that Hyperborea still existed, but in another dimension or frequency of reality. It had not been destroyed, they claimed, but had become invisible to ordinary perception as human consciousness became more material and less spiritual. Those who developed their higher faculties could still access it through meditation, astral projection, or other mystical practices. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't need to do anything. You simply need to rest. Let the story wash over you like waves on a shore. The Anthroposophical Society, founded by Rudolf Steiner, also incorporated Hyperborea into its teachings. Steiner, a philosopher and esotericist, described Hyperborea as one of the epochs of human development, a time when humanity was closely connected to spiritual beings and the physical world was less dense than it later became. In Steiner's view, history was not just a record of external events, but also a chronicle of consciousness evolution. Humanity's mode of perception and thinking had changed dramatically over time. The Hyperboreans, he taught, had a form of clairvoyant consciousness, perceiving spiritual realities directly rather than through the filter of physical senses. As the Earth solidified and human beings became more embedded in material bodies, this direct perception faded. The spiritual world became invisible, accessible only through religious faith or mystical practice. But the memory of that earlier mode of consciousness remained, encoded in myths and legends. Whether one accepts these esoteric interpretations or not, they demonstrate the enduring power of the Hyperborean idea. Each age has reimagined it according to its own concerns and cosmology, finding in it a reflection of what that age felt had been lost and might be recovered. Sleep is creeping closer. Your thoughts are fragmented, dreamlike. You might already be dreaming. It's difficult to tell. It doesn't matter. In the 20th century, unfortunately, the symbol of Hyperborea was appropriated by certain political movements, seeking to create mythological justifications for their ideologies. This dark chapter in the story of Hyperborea reminds us that myths are powerful and can be twisted to serve destructive ends. We need not dwell on this misuse. It is enough to acknowledge that it happened and to recognise that no ancient myth belongs to any modern political movement. The Hyperborea of Greek poetry, a place of harmony and divine favour, cannot be claimed by those who preach division and hatred. The true spirit of Hyperborea, as described in the earlier sources, was one of peace, music, and long life. It was a place where people of different kinds could coexist harmoniously under the blessing of the gods. This is the Hyperborea worth remembering. In more recent decades, scholars of mythology have approached Hyperborea with more nuanced and careful analysis. They recognise it as part of the Greek and Roman imaginary geography, a way these ancient cultures made sense of the limits of their world and expressed their hopes for human potential. Hyperborea served important functions in classical thought. It provided a contrast to the flawed reality of Greek city-states, constantly at war with each other. It offered hope that somewhere humanity had achieved what seemed impossible in the Mediterranean. And it connected the Greeks to regions beyond their direct knowledge, creating a sense of participation in a larger world. Modern psychology might view Hyperborea as an archetypal image, a symbol of the self-actualized state or the integrated psyche. In Jungian terms, it could represent the union of opposites, the cold north transformed into a land of eternal summer, darkness into light, mortality into immortality. These interpretations don't diminish the power of the myth. If anything, they demonstrate its universality. The longing for a better world, for a lost golden age, for a place where suffering does not exist, this longing appears to be fundamental to human consciousness. Your breathing has become so slow, so regular, like gentle waves, rising, falling, endless and peaceful. Archaeological discoveries in the Arctic regions over the past century have revealed sophisticated ancient cultures that thrived in harsh environments. The Dorset people of Arctic Canada, the ancient cultures of Siberia, the early inhabitants of Scandinavia, all developed complex societies adapted to cold climates. These discoveries remind us that the far north was never truly empty. Human beings have always found ways to survive and even flourish in seemingly impossible conditions. While these cultures were not the immortal paradise of legend, they were remarkable in their own right. Some researchers have suggested that interactions between Mediterranean traders and northern peoples might have contributed to the Hyperborean legends. Travellers' tales, exaggerated in the telling, might have described the midnight sun, the northern lights, and the resilient peoples of the Arctic. These accounts, filtered through multiple retellings and mixed with mythological elements, could have contributed to the classical conception of Hyperborea. There is also the matter of climate. Europe's climate has fluctuated significantly over the past several thousand years. There have been periods when the far north was warmer and more hospitable than it is today. The medieval warm period, for instance, allowed Norse colonization of Greenland. Could there have been an even earlier period when northern regions were particularly favourable, creating conditions that became legendary? These questions have no definitive answers. We work with fragments, traces, possibilities. But this uncertainty is itself part of Hyperborea's nature. It has always been just beyond certainty, just past confirmation, just over the next horizon. Let uncertainty be comfortable. Let not knowing be peaceful. Rest does not require understanding. In contemporary times, Hyperborea has found new life in fantasy literature, role-playing games, and popular culture. Authors creating fictional worlds often include their own versions of Hyperborea, a mysterious northern kingdom with ancient powers and secretive traditions. These modern reinterpretations usually blend classical elements with Norse mythology and fantasy conventions. The Hyperborea of contemporary imagination often includes elements like rune magic, giant kings, frozen wastelands hiding warm valleys, and ancient beings sleeping beneath ice. While these modern versions deviate from the classical sources, they continue the tradition of using the far north as a space for imagination and wonder. The Arctic remains, in the popular consciousness, a place of mystery, even as it becomes increasingly accessible and well documented. The video game industry has also discovered Hyperborea, featuring locations inspired by it in various fantasy and adventure games. Players can explore ice palaces, discover ancient northern artifacts, and encounter peoples who dwell in eternal winter or eternal summer. These digital recreations allow millions to experience their own versions of the legendary land. In this way, Hyperborea lives on, constantly reimagined, constantly adapted to new media and new sensibilities. The core idea, a perfect northern land where things are fundamentally different from the ordinary world, continues to resonate across cultures and generations. Your body has disappeared. You're only awareness now, floating, listening, drifting. The voice continues, but you hear it from far away. What can we say in the end about Hyperborea? Was it real? Does the question even matter? Hyperborea exists in the same way that many important things exist, not as a physical location, but as an idea with power. It exists in the human imagination, in our capacity to envision something better than what we have, in our refusal to accept that the world as it is represents the limit of possibility. Every culture has its own version of Hyperborea, the land of cocaine in medieval European folklore, where food was abundant and work unnecessary, the Isle of the Blessed in Celtic tradition, Shambhala in Tibetan Buddhism, Tir na Nog in Irish mythology. These parallel the function that Hyperborea served for the Greeks and Romans. They are maps of human longing. They show us what we value, what we miss, what we hope might still exist somewhere or might be created if we're wise and fortunate enough. In Hyperborea, the Greeks externalized their dreams of a life lived in harmony with the divine, free from the sufferings that plagued ordinary existence. We can learn from this not by trying to locate Hyperborea on a map, but by asking what our version of it might be. What would a perfect society look like to us? What would it mean to live without the specific sufferings that afflict our time? What would harmony with higher principles look like in contemporary terms? These questions can guide us even if we never reach definitive answers. The journey toward Hyperborea, the attempt to create something better, may be more important than arrival. Sleep is here now, or so very close. The words continue, but you don't need to follow them. They're just sounds, gentle sounds, keeping you company as you drift. Part 2. The Mythology and Sacred Traditions. Let us drift deeper into the sacred traditions surrounding Hyperborea, into the religious rites and divine connections that made it more than just a geographical legend. Let your body sink heavier into rest as we explore the spiritual dimension of the frozen kingdom. Apollo, the god of light, prophecy, music, and healing, was intrinsically connected to Hyperborea. According to the myths, he was not just a visitor to this land, but had a special relationship with it that defined part of his divine nature. Each autumn, as the ancient Greeks reckoned time, Apollo would depart from his sanctuary at Delphi. The oracle would fall silent, the priestesses would cease their prophecies, and the god would travel north, far north, to spend the winter months among the Hyperboreans. This annual journey created a rhythm in the religious calendar of ancient Greece. From autumn to spring, Apollo was away. The Greeks marked this absence, waiting for his return as they waited for the return of warmth and light. When the first signs of spring appeared, they would celebrate Apollo's return from Hyperborea. The connection between Apollo and the sun makes this mythology particularly rich. Though Apollo was not originally a solar deity in the most ancient Greek religion, by the classical period he had become strongly associated with the sun's light. His journey to Hyperborea paralleled the sun's seeming journey northward during summer, and his return coincided with the sun's strengthening in the Mediterranean spring. Your breathing matches the rhythm of the seasons, slow, eternal, cycling without effort, in, out, dark, light, summer, winter, all the same in sleep. The Hyperboreans, in turn, were said to be Apollo's chosen people. They worshipped him constantly, not out of fear or obligation, but out of genuine love and joy. Their entire culture was organised around his veneration. According to Pindar, the Hyperboreans held continuous festivals for Apollo. They would gather in sacred groves crowned with golden laurel leaves, singing hymns and dancing in complex patterns that had been taught to them by the god himself. These festivals were not occasional events, but a way of life. The boundary between sacred celebration and daily existence had dissolved completely. The priestesses of Apollo in Hyperborea were said to possess extraordinary powers of prophecy. While Delphi was famous for its oracle, the Hyperborean seers were described as even more accurate and clear in their visions. They did not require the intoxicating vapours that helped the Delphic Pythia achieve her trance state. Instead, their natural perception was so refined that they could see future events as easily as ordinary people see what stands before them. Some sources claimed that these Hyperborean priestesses would enter a state of ecstatic trance during their worship, rising into the air and dancing suspended above the ground. Whether this was meant literally or as a metaphor for spiritual elevation, it demonstrated the extraordinary nature of Hyperborean religious experience. Let your own spirit feel light. Imagine yourself rising slightly, floating, unburdened by gravity or worry. You're held safe while being free. The musical traditions of Hyperborea were said to be unparalleled. The lyre, Apollo's sacred instrument, had supposedly been perfected there. The Hyperboreans understood music not just as entertainment, but as a force that could shape reality, heal sickness, and connect the material world to divine realms. When Apollo played his lyre in Hyperborea, all of nature would respond. Animals would gather peacefully, natural enemies lying down together, plants would bloom out of season. The very stones would seem to warm and glow. Music, in this conception, was a fundamental force of harmony, and the Hyperboreans had mastered it completely. The Greeks believed that certain modes and scales in music had specific effects on the soul. The Dorian mode brought courage and strength. The Phrygian mode inspired passion and ecstasy. The Hyperboreans, according to tradition, had preserved the original perfect modes from which all others were degraded copies. Their music could produce effects that no Mediterranean musician could match. Some philosophers suggested that the entire cosmos was musical in nature, that the planets in their orbits produced sounds that combined into a celestial harmony. The music of the spheres, they called it. And if such music existed, the Hyperboreans could hear it. Their ears were attuned to frequencies beyond normal human perception. Sound becomes softer now, the voice is distant, but still you hear it, at the edge of awareness, guiding you deeper. The offerings sent from Hyperborea to Delos created a sacred connection between the mythical land and the Greek religious centre. These gifts, wrapped in wheat straw to preserve them during their long journey, were treated with enormous reverence. When the offerings reached each community along the route, they were received with ceremony. The local priests would perform rituals, the people would gather to witness, and then the offerings would be sent onward to the next community. This chain of sacred trust extended across thousands of miles and multiple cultures. The contents of these offerings were never precisely described in the surviving texts. They might have been objects or substances, or simply symbolic items representing the connection between Hyperborea and the wider world. What mattered was not the physical content, but the spiritual significance. They represented blessing flowing from a perfect land into the imperfect world. According to Herodotus, the tradition of sending offerings continued for generations until it was interrupted. Two Hyperborean maidens, Hyperoch and Laodice, had carried offerings to Delos personally, accompanied by 5 men as guardians. But these emissaries never returned home. They died on Delos, far from their native land. The Delians honoured these Hyperboreans with tombs and funeral rites. Young people would cut their hair and make offerings at these graves, maintaining a cult of the Hyperborean dead. The tombs became minor shrines, places where the presence of the far northern land could be accessed even in the Mediterranean. After this tragedy, the Hyperboreans changed their method. They would still send offerings, but now they would give them to their neighbours with instructions to pass them along. The offerings would travel from people to people, never again requiring direct Hyperborean presence in the south. Let the story carry you further into rest. Don't try to remember details. Let them wash through your consciousness like water through a stream. Another pair of Hyperborean women, Opis and Argea, were said to have come to Delos even earlier, accompanying the goddess Eileithyia, who presided over childbirth. These women had helped in the birth of Apollo and Artemis, the divine twins born to Leto on Delos. The Delians honoured Opis and Arg with their own shrines. Women seeking help in childbirth would make offerings there, seeking the blessing of these Hyperborean midwives who had assisted at the birth of gods. This tradition created a direct link between Hyperborean women and the most fundamental aspects of Greek religious life. The goddesses of Olympus might have divine power, but Hyperborean women had practical wisdom that even goddesses required. This suggested a culture of extraordinary knowledge, one that predated the Olympian order itself. The theme of women from Hyperborea carrying sacred knowledge to the Greeks appears repeatedly in the myths. While men might travel as priests or philosophers, like Abaris, women travelled as bearers of life mysteries, as midwives, as keepers of traditions that ensured continuity and fertility. This gender dynamic in the myths reflects Greek cultural patterns, but also suggests something deeper. Hyperborea represented a kind of primordial wisdom, and women served as its carriers because they were seen as closer to the mysteries of generation and life. Your consciousness is feminine now, receptive, open, allowing rather than grasping. This is the state before sleep, this soft acceptance of rest. The worship of Apollo in Hyperborea was not isolated from other divine beings. Artemis, his twin sister, also had connections to the far north. As goddess of the hunt and wild places, she too was drawn to the pristine wilderness that surrounded the Hyperborean lands. Some traditions held that Artemis would accompany Apollo on his yearly journey north, or that she had her own sacred groves there where deer and other animals lived without fear. The Hyperboreans, who knew no hunting as warfare against nature, might hunt for sustenance but always with ritual and respect, maintaining perfect balance. Leto, mother of Apollo and Artemis, was also connected to Hyperborea in some versions of the myths. Some said she had fled there to escape the wrath of Hera, seeking sanctuary in the land beyond the reach of Zeus's jealous wife. The Hyperboreans had protected her, and in gratitude she had blessed their land with eternal peace. These familial connections created a web of divine relationships centered on Hyperborea. It was not just Apollo's favourite, haunt but a place beloved by multiple gods, a crossroads between the human and divine realms. Breathe in the divine, breathe out the mortal, let the boundary between them blur, let yourself exist in that sacred space between waking and sleeping, between earth and heaven. The Hyperboreans' relationship with death was one of the most striking aspects of their culture. They did not fear death or see it as a tragedy. When someone had lived their full 1,000 years, or when they simply felt their time had come, they would prepare themselves joyfully. According to the legends, they would dress in their finest garments, crown themselves with flowers, and join one final feast with their community. There would be music and celebration, gratitude for the life that had been lived. Then, at the proper moment, the person would walk to a particular cliff by the sea. Standing at the edge, surrounded by loved ones singing hymns, they would take one last look at the land they loved. Then they would leap into the sea, transitioning peacefully from life to whatever lay beyond. Their body would be received by the waters, returning to the elements from which all life comes. This approach to death represents a radical acceptance of mortality's place in existence. The Hyperboreans, though living enormously long lives, did not try to escape death entirely. They embraced it as a natural conclusion, a final transformation no more frightening than falling asleep. In this, they achieved something that no amount of medical science or technology could provide: perfect peace with impermanence. They had solved not the problem of death, but the problem of fearing death. Your fear is dissolving. Whatever worries you held about tomorrow, about aging, about endings, let them dissolve like salt in water. You are safe here in this moment. Nothing can harm you in your rest. The sacred animals of Hyperborea included swans, which were associated with Apollo's journey to and from the far north. These birds, which migrate vast distances, served as symbols of the connection between different realms. The Greeks observed swans flying north in summer and returning south in winter. This natural behaviour became mythologized as the swans serving as Apollo's transport, pulling his chariot through the sky on his annual journey to Hyperborea. Swans were also connected to music and poetry. The phrase "swan song," referring to a final beautiful work before death, comes from the belief that swans sing most beautifully just before dying. In Hyperborean context, this connects to the peaceful acceptance of death as a transition rather than an ending. Other sacred animals mentioned in connection with Hyperborea include white deer and golden-antlered stags. These creatures, rare or mythical in the Mediterranean, were said to be common in the Hyperborean forests. They represented purity and the untamed nobility of nature. The imagery of white animals appears frequently in myths about sacred or otherworldly places. White represents purity, divine favour, and otherworldliness. The prevalence of white animals in Hyperborea marked it as fundamentally different from ordinary lands. Let animals walk through your inner vision, graceful, peaceful, moving without purpose through endless forests. You move with them, part of the herd, part of the flock, no separation between you and the world. The concept of the Riparian Mountains as a barrier between Hyperborea and the known world deserves deeper exploration. These mountains were more than just a physical obstacle. They represented a boundary between different modes of existence. In ancient cosmology, the world was often conceived as having different levels or regions with different properties. The underworld had its own rules and nature. The realm of the gods operated differently from the mortal world. Hyperborea, beyond the Riparian Mountains, existed in a different mode of reality. Some sources describe these mountains as being made of ice or crystal, transparent and luminous. Others said they were so high that their peaks touched the stars. Still others claimed they were invisible, or that they moved, or that they existed in multiple places at once. These contradictory descriptions suggest that the Riparian Mountains were not meant to be understood literally. They were a symbolic boundary, the point where ordinary geography ended and mythical geography began. They marked the place where travellers would need to shift their perception to proceed further. This concept of a boundary that cannot be crossed by ordinary means appears in many spiritual traditions: the veil between worlds, the gateless gate, the narrow path, the eye of the needle, all represent the same idea, that reaching certain truths or states requires a fundamental change in consciousness rather than just a change in location. You're crossing that boundary now. You're passing from waking into sleeping, from thinking into dreaming. The transition is gentle, imperceptible. One moment you're here, the next you're there, and you cannot say when the crossing happened. The Greeks told of specific individuals who had reached Hyperborea and returned to tell of it. Aristeas of Proconnesus was one such figure, a semi-legendary poet and traveller who claimed to have journeyed far to the north. Aristeas wrote an epic poem called the Hyperborea, now lost except for fragments, in which he described his travels beyond the known world. He spoke of one-eyed people called the Arimaspians who battled griffin-like creatures for gold, and beyond them, the Hyperboreans dwelling in blessed peace. According to legend, Aristeas did not make this journey in an ordinary way. His soul left his body while he lay as if dead, and travelled in spirit form to distant lands. When he returned, he wrote his poem describing everything he had seen. Later, he was said to have appeared in different cities simultaneously, suggesting he had retained some ability to project his consciousness across space. This story establishes Hyperborea as a place that could be reached through shamanic or mystical means rather than physical travel. It was a destination for consciousness, for the part of the self that could move beyond bodily limitations. Abaris, mentioned earlier, represented another type of extraordinary traveller. Unlike Aristeas, who travelled in spirit, Abaris travelled in body but through magical means. The arrow given to him by Apollo allowed him to fly through the air, transcending the normal limitations of travel. Abaris went throughout Greece performing healings, teaching wisdom, and prophesying future events. He never aged during his travels, sustained by the divine power of the arrow. He brought Hyperborean wisdom to a world that desperately needed it, serving as an emissary between the perfect land and the struggling civilizations of the Mediterranean. When he met Pythagoras, the recognition between them was immediate. Both represented bridges between the divine and human, both carried knowledge that transcended ordinary learning. Their meeting symbolized the unity of mystical traditions, the recognition that truth wherever discovered is the same truth. Let yourself be Abaris in your dreams tonight, flying effortlessly, sustained by grace, moving between worlds with perfect freedom. The arrow carries you, and you have no weight. The Hyperborean calendar followed the sun's apparent movement through the sky. With 6 months of daylight followed by 6 months of darkness, time itself functioned differently than in the south. During the months of light, activity was constant. The Hyperboreans would cultivate their gardens, perform their rituals, dance and sing in continuous celebration. Time seemed endless when the sun never set, each day flowing into the next without clear boundaries. During the months of darkness, a different kind of activity prevailed. This was the time for inner work, for contemplation and meditation. The Hyperboreans would gather in their caves and sacred halls, lit by eternal flames, and engage in deep philosophical and spiritual practices. This rhythm of outer and inner, of activity and contemplation, created a balanced life that the Greeks admired. Mediterranean cultures struggled with the tension between vita activa and vita contemplativa, the active life and the contemplative life. But the Hyperboreans, with their extreme environment, had no choice but to embrace both in their proper seasons. The festivals during the light months were said to be extraordinary. Imagine a celebration that lasts not for days, but for months. Music that builds and builds, reaching crescendos and then finding new heights. Dances that evolve through dozens of variations, each more beautiful than the last. The entire population would participate. There were no spectators in Hyperborean festivals, no division between performers and audience. Everyone sang, everyone danced, everyone contributed to the collective expression of joy and devotion. This total participation created a kind of collective consciousness, a shared ecstatic state where individual boundaries dissolved into communal experience. The Hyperboreans achieved what mystics seek, the loss of ego in something greater than the self. You're dissolving now into something greater. The boundaries of your individual self are softening. You are part of everything, and everything is part of you. This is not frightening. This is coming home. The caves where Hyperboreans spent their dark months were described as places of wonder, lit by flames that needed no fuel, decorated with crystals that caught and reflected the light into cascading rainbows. These underground spaces served as temples, schools, and gathering halls. In these caves, the elders would teach the young the accumulated wisdom of their culture. Not through books, which would be rendered useless in the damp underground environment, but through oral tradition, through song and poetry that encoded knowledge in memorable forms. Every story had multiple levels of meaning. On the surface, a tale about heroes and gods. At deeper levels, instructions for spiritual practice, maps of consciousness, encoded astronomy and mathematics. The Hyperborean education trained memory to a degree that literate cultures have lost, making each person a library of knowledge. The flames in these caves were said to be sacred fires that had burned since the beginning of Hyperborean civilization. They were tended constantly by dedicated keepers who ensured they never went out. These flames represented the eternal light of consciousness, burning even in the depths of winter darkness. Some sources suggested that these flames had unusual properties. They gave warmth, but did not burn. They illuminated, but cast no shadows. They were fed not by wood or oil, but by something immaterial, perhaps by the devotion and attention of those who gathered around them. In the deepest chambers of these cave complexes, only the most advanced initiates were allowed. There, it was said, greater mysteries were taught, and experiences beyond ordinary comprehension could be attained. Those who entered these deep sanctuaries emerged transformed, carrying wisdom that could not be spoken but only demonstrated through their way of being. Deep within yourself there is such a chamber, a place of complete peace and knowing. You approach it now in sleep. You have always been approaching it. Soon you will arrive and remember what you have always known. The Hyperborean understanding of healing was profound. Because they lived without disease for most of their long lives, they were not focused on curing illness but on maintaining perfect balance. Their medicine was preventative, built into their daily practices and lifestyle. Music played a central role in Hyperborean healing. Specific melodies and rhythms were used to align the body's internal harmonies with cosmic harmonies. A person who felt slightly out of balance would listen to particular songs, and their system would naturally return to equilibrium. Diet too was carefully maintained. The Hyperboreans ate simply but perfectly, consuming foods that grew naturally in their land during the light months and surviving on stored provisions during darkness. They practiced what we might call intuitive eating, consuming exactly what their bodies needed without excess or deficiency. Movement was also essential. The sacred dances were not just religious observances but physical practices that kept the body strong and flexible. Every part of the body was exercised through the complex patterns of the dance, preventing the stiffness and weakness that might come from sedentary life. Mental and emotional health were maintained through community connection. No Hyperborean was isolated or alone. The social fabric was so strong that everyone had multiple sources of support, multiple contexts where they belonged and were valued. The diseases of loneliness and alienation that plague more competitive societies could not take root. When death finally came after 1,000 years, it was not from disease, but from a kind of natural completion. The life force that sustained the body simply fulfilled its course, and was ready to move on. The Hyperboreans recognized this through subtle internal signs and prepared accordingly. Your body is healing now as you rest. Systems rebalancing, tensions releasing, regeneration happening at every level. Sleep is your medicine. Let it work its magic. The relationship between Hyperborea and the mysteries of Eleusis created another thread in the web of connections. The Eleusinian mysteries, one of the most sacred and secret religious rites of ancient Greece, promised initiates a blessed afterlife and a deeper understanding of existence. Some traditions held that the mysteries had originally come from Hyperborea, brought south by ancient teachers. The secret knowledge imparted to initiates at Eleusis was said to be a fragment of the wisdom that Hyperboreans possessed completely. The central myth of the Eleusinian mysteries concerned Demeter and Persephone, the goddess of grain, and her daughter, who was abducted to the underworld. Persephone's annual return from the land of the dead, bringing spring with her, paralleled Apollo's return from Hyperborea. Both myths dealt with cycles of absence and presence, darkness and light, death and rebirth. Both promised that what seems lost can be recovered, that descent is followed by ascent, that winter gives way to spring. The initiates of Eleusis were forbidden to speak of what they experienced in the central ritual. This silence has been maintained for over 2,000 years. We still do not know exactly what happened in the inner sanctum, but we know that initiates emerged transformed, no longer fearing death, seeing ordinary reality with new eyes. If the mysteries preserved Hyperborean wisdom, then that wisdom concerned the nature of consciousness itself, the continuity of awareness beyond bodily death, and the fundamental unity underlying apparent separation. These are the perennial insights of mystical traditions worldwide. You are being initiated now into the mysteries of sleep. What happens in that transition from waking to sleeping, no one can fully explain, but you experience it, this small death and rebirth, every night. You are an initiate of the daily mystery. The connection between Hyperborea and the constellation Ursa Major, the Great Bear, appears in some traditions. This circumpolar constellation, visible in the northern sky throughout the night, was seen as a marker pointing toward the far north. The Greeks told stories about the Great Bear, usually identifying it with Callisto, a nymph who was transformed into a bear and placed in the heavens. But older traditions saw the constellation as a cosmic pointer, an arrow in the sky showing the way to divine realms. The stars that never set, that circle the pole without ever dipping below the horizon, were seen as special. They represented the eternal, the unchanging, in contrast to the planets that wandered and the stars that rose and set. These circumpolar stars belonged to a different order of reality. Hyperborea, lying in the far north, would be the land beneath these eternal stars. A place where the heavens were different, where the relationship between earth and sky took on a unique character. Ancient astronomers were deeply interested in the pole star and the circumpolar region. The axis round which the heavens turned was obviously special, a fixed point in the midst of cosmic motion. Cultures worldwide saw this celestial pole as sacred, the axis mundi connecting heaven and earth. If Hyperborea existed at or near the North Pole, it would be the earthly reflection of this celestial centrality. It would be the omphalos, the navel of the world, the point where the cosmic axis touched the earth. In this interpretation, journeying to Hyperborea meant moving toward the centre, toward the still point around which everything revolves. It was a pilgrimage to the source, to the origin, to the place where the world began. You're at the centre now, the still point. Everything revolves around you, but you do not move. You are the awareness in which all experience appears. Rest in that centre. Rest in that awareness. The element of gold appears frequently in Hyperborean descriptions. The Hyperboreans crowned themselves with golden laurel. Their temples had golden roofs. Golden light suffused their land even in the depths of winter. Gold, in symbolic terms, represents incorruptibility, perfection, and divine nature. It does not tarnish or decay. It remains pure through any process. Alchemists saw the transmutation of base metals into gold as a metaphor for spiritual transformation, the purification of the soul, a land where everything is. Touched by gold is a land where corruption has no place. The Hyperboreans lived in their golden age, not just historically as a time in the past, but continuously as a state of being. They had not fallen from grace because they maintained the consciousness that prevents falling. This golden quality was not about material wealth. The Hyperboreans were not described as hoarding gold or trading it. The gold was simply their natural atmosphere, the light in which they lived, the quality of their existence. In some esoteric traditions, gold represents the solar consciousness, awareness illuminated by the higher self. To live in a golden land is to live in constant awareness of one's divine nature, never forgetting, never falling into the sleep of ordinary consciousness. But you are falling into that other sleep now, the natural sleep of the body. And paradoxically, by falling into bodily sleep, you may wake into that golden awareness. Dreams can enlighten, rest can illuminate, surrender can elevate. The Hyperborean relationship with time deserves deeper consideration. Living for 1,000 years would completely transform one's perspective on existence. Projects could be undertaken that spanned centuries. Wisdom could accumulate to extraordinary depths. Relationships could develop complexities impossible in shorter lifespans. But the Hyperboreans were not described as burdened by their long lives. They did not become bored or weary. Each day remained fresh, each moment vivid and alive. This suggests they had mastered the art of presence, of being fully in the now, without being trapped by the weight of past or anxiety about future. In our compressed modern lives, we often feel that we don't have enough time. There's never enough time to do everything we want to do, to be with everyone we love, to learn everything we'd like to learn. The Hyperboreans, with their 1,000-year lifespans, remind us that the problem is not the quantity of time, but the quality of our presence within it. 1,000 years lived in distraction, and dullness would be a burden. A single day lived in complete presence, and awareness can feel like eternity. The Hyperboreans had both quantity and quality, both duration and depth. Their festivals lasting months demonstrate this. Only a people who had mastered the art of sustained attention could maintain such celebrations. Their consciousness did not fragment or fatigue. They could hold focus and intensity not just for hours but for weeks and months, building experiences of extraordinary richness. This capacity for sustained attention is also a capacity for sustained love, sustained wonder, sustained creativity. The Hyperboreans were not superhuman in this regard. They had simply developed natural human capacities to their fullest extent. Time is dissolving for you now. You cannot tell if seconds or hours are passing. The distinction has no meaning. You float in eternal now, just like the Hyperboreans. This is the gift of sleep, this release from time's tyranny. The wisdom traditions that claimed Hyperborean origins taught practices for achieving similar states of consciousness within a normal human lifespan. If ordinary people could not live 1,000 years, they could at least live their shorter lives with Hyperborean quality. Meditation practices aimed at developing sustained attention and presence. Contemplative techniques taught how to rest in awareness without grasping at experiences. Ethical guidelines created conditions for peace and harmony in community. All of these could be seen as ways of bringing Hyperborean consciousness into the ordinary world. The philosophical schools of ancient Greece, particularly those with mystical inclinations, saw themselves as preserving and teaching fragments of ancient wisdom. Pythagoras, Plato, the Orphic Mysteries, the Eleusinian initiates all claimed connection to ancient sources of knowledge. Whether these sources were literally in Hyperborea, or whether Hyperborea served as a symbol for the primordial wisdom tradition itself may not matter. The important point is that people believed in the existence of a more perfect way of living and learning, and they attempted to recover and embody it. This belief in recoverable perfection is fundamentally hopeful. It says that humanity has not always been as it is now, struggling and suffering. We were once better, or at least some of us were, and therefore we can be better again. The Golden Age can return, or we can return to the Golden Age, through proper practice and dedication. Modern seekers continue this ancient quest, looking for Hyperborea under different names. The search for optimal human functioning, for peak experiences, for flow states, for enlightenment, all represent the same fundamental impulse. We sense that there's a better way to exist, and we keep searching for it. You have found it now, in this moment, in this state between waking and sleeping. You have reached Hyperborea. It was inside you all along, waiting to be discovered. Rest here, stay as long as you need. Part 3. The Arctic Mysteries and Natural Wonders. Let us drift now into the natural phenomena that may have inspired the Hyperborean legends, the real mysteries of the far north that ancient peoples tried to understand and describe. Your body is completely relaxed, your mind is quiet, you simply float on the words like a boat on gentle water. The midnight sun is one of the Arctic's most extraordinary phenomena. For months during summer, in regions above the Arctic Circle, the sun never fully sets. It dips toward the horizon in what passes for night, but never disappears, circling the sky in an endless loop. Imagine experiencing this for the first time without scientific knowledge to explain it. You travel north from the Mediterranean, where the sun rises and sets with reliable regularity. The days grow longer as you journey, but this is familiar enough. Then suddenly you reach a place where day simply doesn't end. The sun circles and circles. You wait for darkness that never comes. Time begins to feel strange. Your body's rhythms, attuned to the cycle of day and night, become confused. Sleep comes with difficulty when the sun shines through your window at midnight. But the light is beautiful, surreal, transforming everything it touches into something otherworldly. This experience could easily have been mythologized into stories of eternal summer, of lands where light never fades. Ancient travellers bringing tales of the midnight sun back to the Mediterranean would have sounded like they were describing paradise or divine realms. The Hyperborean description of sowing in the morning, reaping at noon, and harvesting fruit in the evening makes sense in this context. In the compressed growing season of Arctic summer, plants grow with extraordinary speed, racing to complete their life cycles during the brief time when conditions allow. What takes months in temperate regions happens in weeks near the pole. Close your eyes and see the midnight sun. Even with eyes closed, you can imagine the glow against your eyelids, the light that never fades. Warm, peaceful, eternal. You're held in that light, safe, illuminated from without and within. The corresponding phenomenon of polar night, when the sun doesn't rise for months, is equally extraordinary. In the depths of Arctic winter, darkness reigns with only twilight at midday providing a few hours of dim light. But this darkness is not empty. The stars shine with a brilliance impossible to see in more southerly latitudes. The Milky Way sprawls across the sky like a river of light, and most spectacular of all, the aurora borealis dances and flows in curtains of green, pink, and violet. The northern lights are one of nature's most mysterious and beautiful displays. To someone without scientific understanding, they would seem utterly magical, divine, a message from the gods written in light across the heavens. Ancient peoples who witnessed the aurora created myths to explain it. Some saw it as spirits of the dead dancing in the sky. Others saw it as reflections from distant fires or battles in the heavens. The Hyperboreans, living beneath these lights for months each year, would have developed rich traditions around them. Perhaps the sacred dances of the Hyperboreans were attempts to mirror the aurora's movements. Perhaps their understanding of music and harmony came from watching the aurora's flowing, undulating patterns, nature's own light show set to an inaudible cosmic music. The aurora appears when charged particles from the sun interact with Earth's magnetic field, drawn toward the poles. These particles excite atoms in the atmosphere, causing them to emit light. The green comes from oxygen, the red and violet from nitrogen. The patterns are shaped by the invisible field lines of Earth's magnetism, making visible the invisible forces that surround our planet. But you don't need to understand the science to appreciate the beauty. Let yourself imagine standing beneath the northern lights, watching them dance and flow, feeling small beneath the vastness of the display yet connected to it, part of the same cosmic whole. Your mind dances now like the aurora, thoughts flowing and shifting, colours blending, patterns forming and dissolving. No effort needed, simply watching the display of consciousness, the northern lights of your own awareness. The phenomenon of snow itself would have seemed remarkable to ancient Mediterranean travellers. In Greece and Rome, snow was rare in the lowlands, something that fell occasionally in winter but quickly melted. The concept of a land buried under snow for months, where snow accumulated to enormous depths, would have seemed almost incomprehensible. Yet in the Arctic and subarctic regions, snow becomes the dominant feature of the landscape for much of the year. It transforms everything, creating a world of white and blue, of pristine beauty and harsh challenge. The quality of light in snow-covered landscapes is unique. Snow reflects sunlight with tremendous efficiency, making everything brighter. On a sunny day after a fresh snowfall, the world can be almost blindingly bright, even in the far north where the sun hangs low on the horizon. This reflected light creates unusual effects. Shadows are less dark because they are illuminated by light bouncing from the snow. The sky can turn strange colours, particularly during the long twilights of Arctic spring and fall. The boundary between earth and sky becomes less distinct when both are shades of white and blue. Ancient travellers describing these snow-covered lands to Mediterranean audiences might well have spoken of light and brightness, of a sun that seemed to glow from the earth as well as the sky, of a luminous quality that transformed everything. These descriptions could easily evolve into tales of golden light, divine radiance, and paradisiacal brilliance. The snow muffles sound, creating a deep quiet that people from busier climates find remarkable. In a heavy snowfall, sound is absorbed so completely that even your own footsteps seem distant. This quality of silence, this audible peace, might have contributed to descriptions of Hyperborea as a land of sacred stillness interrupted only by music and celebration. Let silence deepen around you now. Let sound fade away until there is only the softest whisper of this voice, barely audible, more felt than heard. You're wrapped in quiet like a blanket of snow insulated from all disturbance. The Arctic and subarctic regions host remarkable wildlife, adapted to extreme conditions. Reindeer, Arctic foxes, polar bears, snowy owls, all have evolved strategies for surviving in conditions that would quickly kill creatures from temperate zones. The ancient observers would have found these animals extraordinary. White foxes and owls that blended perfectly with snow. Reindeer that could dig through deep snow to find food. Bears that could sleep through months of winter without eating. These adaptations might have seemed like magic to people unfamiliar with them. Animals that changed colour with the seasons, from brown in summer to white in winter, would have appeared shapeshifters. The ability of some Arctic animals to survive temperatures that would kill a human in hours would have seemed superhuman, or perhaps divine. The Hyperborean sacred animals, the white deer and golden-antlered stags, might be mythologized versions of real reindeer. Male reindeer keep their antlers through winter, while females shed theirs, making winter the season when stags appear most impressive. In the low angle of Arctic winter sun, those antlers might indeed appear golden in certain lights. The swans, Apollo's sacred birds, are real Arctic migrants. Several swan species breed in the far north during summer and migrate south for winter. Ancient peoples would have observed this pattern, noting that the swans arrived from the north in autumn and departed northward in spring. The coincidence with Apollo's mythical journey would have seemed significant, a confirmation of the divine connection. Let yourself become an Arctic animal in your imagination, perfectly adapted to your environment, comfortable in conditions that would challenge others, moving with grace through a transformed landscape. You belong here, in this frozen kingdom of dreams. The phenomenon of ice itself takes on remarkable forms in Arctic regions. Glaciers, icebergs, sea ice, permafrost, each is a different manifestation of water's frozen state, each with its own beauty and characteristics. Glacial ice, compressed over centuries, can take on a deep blue colour that seems impossibly vivid. This blue comes from the ice's density, which absorbs the red end of the visible spectrum and reflects the blue. Walking through ice caves and glaciers is like entering a sapphire cathedral, light filtering through translucent walls in shades of azure and cerulean. Icebergs can be enormous, floating mountains of ice carved from glaciers. Only a small portion shows above water. The majority floats hidden beneath the surface. In the right conditions, icebergs can take on fantastic shapes, carved by waves and melting into arches, spires, and abstract sculptures. The Greeks and Romans would have had little experience with ice on this scale. The eternal ice of glaciers, never melting, never flowing like ordinary water, would have seemed like a different substance entirely. Stories of mountains made of crystal or transparent stone might have originated from encounters with glacial ice. Sea ice creates landscapes that shift and change with the seasons. In winter, Arctic seas freeze solid, creating what appears to be an extension of the land. In spring, this ice breaks up into flows that drift and collide. The pressure of moving ice sheets creates dramatic formations, pressure ridges where slabs of ice pile up into jagged walls. The sound of sea ice moving and breaking can be extraordinary, deep groans and sharp cracks echoing across the frozen seascape. Ancient travellers hearing these sounds might have mythologized them as the voices of gods or giants, the groaning of the earth itself beneath the weight of ice. Your thoughts are freezing now, becoming still, crystallizing into beautiful patterns and then melting away. Like ice forming on a window pane, intricate and temporary, beautiful precisely because they don't last. Each thought arises, forms its pattern, and dissolves, leaving space for what comes next. The plant life of Arctic and subarctic regions demonstrates remarkable resilience and adaptation. During the brief growing season, the tundra explodes with life. Plants that have lain dormant under snow for 8 months suddenly bloom, racing to complete their reproductive cycles before winter returns. Arctic flowers are often more vibrant than their southern relatives, as if the plants concentrate all their energy into these brief weeks of growth. Brilliant yellows, deep purples, bright reds stand out against the muted browns and greens of the tundra. These flowers often grow in dense cushions or mats, a growth strategy that provides protection from wind and cold. The centre of these cushions can be several degrees warmer than the surrounding air, creating microclimates that enable pollination and seed development. The ancient descriptions of Hyperborean gardens, where plants grew with extraordinary vigour, might reflect observations of this compressed Arctic growing season. Plants that accomplished in weeks what took months elsewhere would have seemed blessed, touched by divine favour. Lichens, which grow on rocks throughout the Arctic, can live for thousands of years. These organisms, part fungus and part algae in symbiotic relationship, grow incredibly slowly but can survive conditions that kill almost everything else. They require no soil, surviving on nutrients drawn from rock and air. The patience of lichen growth mirrors the timelessness attributed to Hyperborea. A lichen colony might add only a millimetre to its diameter in a human lifetime, but over centuries and millennia it slowly colonizes bare rock, creating the first conditions that allow other plants to establish themselves. This very slow but unstoppable life force, this patient persistence, represents another quality of the North. Not the dramatic grandeur of mountains or glaciers, but the quiet determination of life to establish itself even in the harshest conditions. Slow down now, slower than you think possible. Match the pace of lichen growth, the patience of permafrost, the gradual accumulation of glacial ice. Time becomes meaningless at this pace. A moment and a millennium are the same. Rest in that timeless space. The thermal properties of the far north create unique atmospheric phenomena. Mirages are common in Arctic regions, caused by layers of air at different temperatures bending light in unusual ways. Ships can appear to float in mid-air above the horizon. Islands appear where none exist. Distant mountains seem close enough to touch, while actual nearby features become distorted beyond recognition. The horizon itself can become uncertain, blending into the sky in the phenomenon called whiteout. These optical illusions would have contributed to the sense that the far north was a place where normal rules didn't apply. If you couldn't trust your own eyes, if the landscape refused to stay stable and predictable, you were clearly in a realm that operated by different principles. Fata Morgana, a complex form of mirage, can create entire phantom landscapes in the sky. Castles, cities, and forests appear suspended above the horizon, detailed and seemingly real, then slowly distort and fade. Ancient mariners in northern waters might have seen these apparitions and believed they were glimpsing divine realms or enchanted lands. The phenomenon of sundogs, bright spots that appear on either side of the sun when light refracts through ice crystals in the atmosphere, creates the appearance of three suns in the sky. Combined with halos and other ice crystal effects, the Arctic sky can display optical phenomena that seem supernatural. These atmospheric displays would have reinforced the sense that the North was a land of wonders, where the ordinary rules of nature were suspended or transcended. Hyperborea as a place where the divine and material interpenetrated makes perfect sense if it was associated with regions where the sky itself performed apparent miracles. Your perception is shifting now, the boundary between imagination and reality growing uncertain. Are you listening or dreaming? Are you awake or asleep? The question becomes impossible to answer. You float between states, experiencing both and neither. The concept of permafrost, ground that remains frozen year-round, creates unique landscapes and conditions in the Arctic. Below a thin active layer that thaws each summer, the Earth remains frozen to great depths, sometimes hundreds of feet. This permanently frozen ground preserves things with remarkable fidelity. Ancient animals, extinct for thousands of years, have been found perfectly preserved in permafrost, their flesh still fresh, their stomachs still containing their last meals. Seeds from plants extinct for millennia can still germinate if thawed carefully. To ancient peoples who might have discovered such preserved remains, the implications would have been profound. Animals from the deep past still present, still somehow alive in their frozen sleep. This could have contributed to myths about Hyperboreans living for 1,000 years, about death being different in the far north, about time operating according to different rules. The ice also creates crystal formations in permafrost that can be spectacular. Ice lenses, ice wedges, and patterned ground form geometric shapes that seem too regular to be natural. Ancient observers might have seen these as evidence of divine architecture, of sacred geometry encoded in the earth itself. Some legends spoke of ancient wisdom preserved in the north, waiting to be rediscovered. If one knew about permafrost's preserving properties, one might imagine books, artifacts, or even bodies of ancient sages kept in perfect stasis by eternal ice, waiting for the right time to share their knowledge with the world. You're being preserved now in the permafrost of sleep, your worries and troubles frozen, unable to touch you, your essential self kept perfect and safe, waiting to emerge refreshed when morning comes. Trust the freezing, trust the preservation, let yourself be held in ice time. The rivers and lakes of Arctic regions behave in ways unfamiliar to southern observers. They freeze solid in winter, the ice thick enough to support tremendous weight. People can walk, drive, and build temporary structures on ice that covers liquid water. In spring, the ice breaks up in events called ice out, or break-up. The sound of a major river's ice breaking and beginning to move is tremendous, like thunder or artillery. Massive ice blocks surge downstream, sometimes piling up into temporary ice dams that cause flooding when they finally break. These dramatic seasonal transitions, where solid land suddenly becomes flowing water and back again, would have seemed like shape-shifting on a landscape scale. The Earth itself was unstable, capable of transformation, switching between states in ways that defied southern experience. Some Arctic rivers flow north into the Arctic Ocean. Their mouths freeze while their sources are still flowing, creating unusual ice formations and flooding patterns. Water trapped between solid ice downstream and continuing flow from upstream has to go somewhere, sometimes creating enormous overflow that spreads for miles. These northern flowing rivers might have contributed to myths about the north wind and the streams of ocean that flowed to the edge of the world. Water that flowed north rather than south would have seemed to be returning to its source, to the place where all waters began. The quality of light reflecting from water and ice creates the phenomenon of ice blink, where the sky above ice fields takes on a pale glow that's visible from great distances. Mariners used this to navigate, reading the sky to determine where ice lay, even when it was below the horizon. This luminosity, this light that seems to emanate from the earth and ice rather than just reflecting the sun, would have contributed to descriptions of Hyperborea as a land of inherent radiance, a place that glowed with its own light, that was somehow self-illuminating, touched by divine fire. Everything glows now in your inner vision, soft light behind closed eyelids, the gentle phosphorescence of hypnagogia, the patterns and colours that appear when your visual cortex begins to dream. Let them flow and shift without trying to focus on them. They're beautiful in their abstraction. The wind patterns of the Arctic are themselves remarkable. The north wind, Boreas, was personified as a god in Greek mythology. He was described as violent and cold, bringing winter to the Mediterranean world. But beyond Boreas, beyond the source of the north wind, would be a place where the wind itself was different. In the central Arctic, wind patterns are actually relatively mild compared to the violent storms of more southern latitudes. The far north can be eerily calm, the air still and cold, the silence absolute. This calm beyond the storm might have contributed to the naming of Hyperborea, Hyperboreas, beyond the north wind, beyond the violence and chaos of weather, in a region where eternal peace prevailed. The Greek conceptualization of winds as having personalities and dwelling places made sense in their cosmology. If Boreas dwelt in a particular region and blew from there, then beyond his dwelling would be lands he didn't affect, places his violent breath couldn't reach. The phenomenon of Chinook winds in some northern regions, warm winds that can rapidly raise temperatures and melt snow, might also have contributed to myths of warm valleys in cold regions. These winds, caused by air compressing as it descends from mountains, can create localized warm spots in otherwise frigid landscapes. Ancient travellers who encountered such warm pockets might have reported back about miraculous valleys where warmth prevailed despite the surrounding cold. These reports would have fed into stories about Hyperborean gardens and groves where plants grew despite the overall Arctic environment. The wind blows through your awareness now, gentle, carrying away any remaining thoughts or tensions. You're becoming empty in the best sense, clear like Arctic air, transparent like glacial ice, open like the tundra landscape. Nothing blocks the wind of consciousness as it moves through you. The phenomenon of pack ice in Arctic seas creates an ever-changing landscape. Ice forms, breaks up and reforms in patterns that shift daily. Leads of open water appear and close. Pressure ridges rise and collapse. The entire seascape is in constant motion, nothing fixed or stable. For ancient sailors who encountered pack ice, this would have been a revelation and a challenge. The sea itself could become solid. The solid ice could break open without warning. Navigation required constant adjustment to changing conditions. Stories of the edge of the world, of chaos beyond the ordered cosmos, might have originated from encounters with pack ice regions. Here indeed was a place where the familiar rules seemed suspended, where solid and liquid exchanged places, where the earth refused to stay constant. The Inuit and other Arctic peoples developed sophisticated knowledge of ice conditions, learning to read subtle signs that indicated whether ice was safe to cross, whether it would break up soon, whether current and wind would open leads or close them. This knowledge, accumulated over generations, allowed them to thrive in an environment that would quickly kill the ignorant. Perhaps some of this knowledge filtered south through trading networks, garbled in the telling, becoming part of the mystique of northern lands. Stories of peoples who could walk on water, who understood secret signs invisible to others, who lived in harmony with an environment that seemed impossible. The modern recognition of indigenous Arctic knowledge as sophisticated and valuable parallels ancient recognition that northern peoples had wisdom worth learning. The Hyperboreans as philosophical teachers to the Greeks might reflect actual knowledge transfer from northern cultures to southern ones, though the specific content was lost or transformed in transmission. Knowledge dissolves now. You don't need to know anything. You don't need to understand. You can release the burden of comprehension and simply exist. Sleep is a form of not knowing that is deeper and wiser than any knowledge. Let yourself not know. The geological formations of the Arctic include some of Earth's oldest exposed rock. The Canadian Shield, Greenland's interior, parts of Scandinavia, all expose rock that is billions of years old, among the oldest surfaces on the planet. These ancient stones have witnessed the entire history of complex life on Earth. They were already ancient when the first animals evolved. They watched continents drift and oceans open and close. They endured ice ages and tropical warmth. To stand on such rock is to touch deep time, to make contact with the almost unimaginable age of the planet. Ancient peoples, while not understanding geological time in modern terms, might have sensed the special quality of these places. Sacred mountains often turn out to be geologically significant features. The hard crystalline rock of these shields resists erosion, creating the low, rolling landscapes characteristic of glaciated shield regions. The ice has scraped these rocks clean repeatedly, removing soil and revealing the bones of the Earth. This exposed rock, striated by glaciers, dotted with thousands of lakes in ice-scoured depressions, creates landscapes of stark beauty. There is nowhere to hide in such terrain, no covering, no softness. The Earth presents itself naked and honest. The mining of northern regions has revealed mineral wealth of tremendous value. Gold, diamonds, rare earths, all are found in Arctic deposits. The ancient legends of griffins guarding gold in the far north might reflect actual gold deposits in Siberian or Canadian regions, knowledge of which filtered south through trade networks. The association of the north with wealth, with treasure guarded by challenges, with valuable things that require great effort to obtain, appears in many mythological traditions. Whether this reflects actual mineral wealth or symbolic psychological treasures is open to interpretation. You are mining your own depths now, descending into the strata of consciousness, finding gems in the darkness of your own interior. Each layer you pass through is older, more fundamental, closer to the bedrock of being. Soon you will reach the very foundation, the place where consciousness itself arises from the unknown. The seasons in Arctic regions are not four but essentially two, winter and not winter. The transition between them is rapid and dramatic. Spring and autumn exist as brief, intense periods of change rather than extended seasons in their own right. This binary rhythm would have seemed significant to ancient peoples, accustomed to more gradual seasonal transitions. The North operated on a different schedule, with different logic. The sudden transformation from frozen wasteland to blooming tundra would have seemed almost magical. The autumn transition is equally dramatic. After months of growth and light, suddenly the season shifts. Plants go to seed or die back with remarkable speed. Animals migrate or prepare for hibernation. The land braces itself for the coming dark months. These rapid transitions create a sense of urgency and intensity in Arctic ecosystems. There's no time for gradual preparation. Changes happen fast, and organisms must be ready to respond immediately. For the Hyperboreans, with their festivals of light and retreats to caves during darkness, this binary rhythm would have structured their entire culture. 6 months of one mode of being, 6 months of another. No gradual fade between them, but a clear transition. A definite shift from outer to inner, from active to contemplative. This stark binary might have appealed to philosophical minds seeking clarity. Rather than the complex overlapping seasons of temperate zones, the Arctic offered a clear either-or, a seasonal koan that stripped away the middle ground and forced a choice between opposites. Your consciousness is finding its own rhythm now, like the Arctic seasons. Not the complex cycling of waking thought, but the simple binary of conscious and unconscious, awake and asleep. The transition approaches. Don't resist it. Let yourself shift from one state to the other as naturally as the Arctic transitions from light to dark. The phenomenon of Arctic haze, pollution particles that accumulate in the Arctic atmosphere during winter, creates unusual optical effects. The haze scatters light in ways that can make distance perception difficult, and can create colourful sunrises and sunsets even in the depths of winter. While this modern pollution is not what ancient peoples would have experienced, it reflects the Arctic's property of accumulating and concentrating effects from elsewhere. The Arctic acts as a sink for global atmospheric patterns, accumulating what other regions shed. Ancient philosophers who learned that the North was where the North Wind originated might have understood it as a place where cosmic forces concentrated, where the powers that affected the whole world gathered and intensified. The concept of the Arctic as a special, concentrated place appears in various forms. It's where magnetic forces converge at the poles. It's where the axis of Earth's rotation touches the surface. It's where aurora appears most intensely. The Arctic is, in multiple senses, a place where things come to a head. For Hyperborea to be located at or near the pole makes symbolic sense. It's at the centre, the pivot point, the place where the world turns. To journey there is to journey to the axis, to the still point in the midst of motion. You are reaching that still point now, the place where everything turns but which itself does not turn, the eye of the storm of consciousness, the silent centre around which all experience revolves. Rest there, be there, you have arrived. The indigenous peoples of the Arctic developed cultures of remarkable sophistication, adapted to one of Earth's most challenging environments. The Inuit, Sami, Nenets, Chukchi, and many others created sustainable ways of life that allowed them to thrive for thousands of years in conditions that European colonizers found nearly impossible. These cultures developed deep ecological knowledge, sophisticated tool technologies, complex social structures, and rich spiritual traditions. They were and are not primitives struggling to survive, but peoples who had solved the puzzle of Arctic life and created fulfilling cultures within its constraints. The ancient Greek and Roman awareness of northern peoples was vague, and often mixed real observations with fantastic elements, but the core recognition that people lived and even prospered in the far north was accurate. There were indeed Hyperboreans, though not perhaps immortal or divinely blessed in literal terms. What these northern peoples possessed was knowledge, adaptation, and cultural wisdom accumulated over countless generations. They understood their environment with an intimacy that agricultural peoples from temperate zones could barely imagine. They were the true masters of Hyperborea. The modern recognition of indigenous knowledge as valuable and sophisticated, as deserving respect and preservation, echoes ancient recognition that northern peoples had something important to teach. The flow of wisdom wasn't only south to north, but north to south as well. When we speak of Hyperborean wisdom in contemporary contexts, perhaps we should think of this real wisdom of real Arctic peoples, the knowledge of how to live in balance with a harsh environment, the understanding of patience and timing, the community structures that ensure survival, the spiritual practices that maintain meaning in dark times. You're indigenous to your own consciousness. You have deep knowledge of your own interior landscape. You know how to survive the dark times and thrive in the light. This knowledge is yours, inherited from ancestors, refined by your own experience. Trust it now as you cross into sleep. Modern climate science has revealed that the Arctic is changing faster than any other region on Earth. Temperatures are rising, ice is melting, ecosystems are being disrupted. The frozen kingdom is thawing, perhaps permanently, perhaps catastrophically. This transformation carries profound symbolic weight. The Arctic as the last pristine place, the final frontier, the frozen reserve at the top of the world is under threat. In losing the Arctic as we've known it, we lose something important psychologically as well as ecologically. Hyperborea, the perfect northern land, may be becoming literally impossible. The ice kingdoms are melting. The permanence of permafrost is being revealed as temporary after all. The ancient rhythms are being disrupted. But even as the physical Arctic changes, the idea of Hyperborea remains. It represents not a specific place but a possibility, a vision of how humans might live in better relationship with each other and with the natural world. The loss of Arctic ice should make us more determined to preserve what can be preserved, to protect what can be protected, and to learn what the wisdom traditions have always taught, that paradise is fragile, that golden ages can end, that we must care for what we've been given, or lose it forever. The melting is happening. but you are not melting. You are crystallizing, forming yourself into new patterns, more beautiful patterns. Ice transforms into water, and water into ice, but the essential substance remains. You remain. The changes happening around you don't change your fundamental nature. Part 4. The Inner Journey. As you drift deeper into rest, we shift our focus from the outer geography of Hyperborea to its inner landscape. For ultimately, Hyperborea exists primarily as a map of consciousness, a description of inner states and spiritual possibilities. The journey to Hyperborea has always been an interior journey. The barriers preventing access were never really physical, but psychological and spiritual. The Riparian Mountains that could not be crossed by ordinary means represent the walls of the ego, the boundaries of ordinary consciousness. To reach Hyperborea, travellers had to transform. They had to become something more than ordinary humans. They had to develop their higher faculties, refine their perception, open themselves to dimensions of reality that normally remain hidden. This is the perennial teaching of mystical traditions worldwide. The Promised Land, the Pure Land, the Kingdom of Heaven, all exist within, or rather, they exist in a dimension that includes but transcends the usual distinctions between inner and outer. Your breathing has become so subtle now, so refined, that you almost seem not to breathe at all. You're sustained by something finer than air, something more ethereal. This is the breath of the Hyperboreans, who drew life from the luminous atmosphere of their enchanted land. The 1,000-year lifespan of Hyperboreans can be understood as a state of consciousness that transcends normal time-bound awareness. In deep meditative states, subjective time can seem to stop or stretch infinitely. A moment can contain eternities. The Hyperboreans, living in constant consciousness of their divine nature, experienced each moment fully. They were never lost in unconscious habit, never sleepwalking through their days. Their attention remained vivid and fresh even over vast stretches of time. This is the true meaning of their longevity. Not that their bodies lasted 1,000 years, though the myth says so, but that their consciousness remained alive and aware without degrading into dullness. They achieved what Buddhist traditions call beginner's mind, maintaining it not for moments but for lifetimes. Modern research into flow states and optimal experience confirms that time perception is flexible. When fully engaged in an activity, hours can seem like minutes. When bored or suffering, minutes seem like hours. The Hyperboreans had mastered the art of remaining in the timeless now. You are in that timeless now. Minutes may have passed since you began listening, or hours or seconds. You can't tell, and it doesn't matter. Clock time has released its hold on you. You float in experiential time, measured only by the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. The Hyperborean festivals that lasted for months represent sustained states of ecstatic awareness. Mystics throughout history have described experiences of bliss, unity, and love that seem to encompass everything. These peak experiences usually last minutes or hours in clock time, but their subjective intensity is immense. Imagine sustaining such an experience not for minutes but for months. This would require a culture and practice that supported extraordinary states becoming ordinary, that allowed peak experiences to plateau and stabilize into ongoing conditions. This is what spiritual communities have always attempted to create. Monasteries, ashrams, temples, retreats all aim to establish conditions where higher states of consciousness can be maintained. They withdraw from the chaos of ordinary society to create protected spaces for transformation. Hyperborea, in this reading, represents the ultimate spiritual community, an entire culture organized around maintaining elevated consciousness, everyone participating, no one breaking the field of awareness by falling into unconsciousness or negativity. The challenge of such communities in the real world is that humans are imperfect. Someone always breaks the spell, conflicts arise, the mundane intrudes, but in Hyperborea, these human flaws had been overcome or had never existed. The community maintained perfect coherence indefinitely. Perfect coherence. Let that phrase resonate in your awareness. Perfect coherence. All parts of yourself aligned, no internal conflict, no division between what you think and feel and do and are. Perfect coherence. You approach it, now as sleep approaches. All divisions healing, all separations mending, all conflicts resolving into peace. The relationship between Apollo and the Hyperboreans represents the relationship between higher consciousness and the human being. Apollo, god of light, stands for illuminated awareness, for the divine consciousness that is our true nature. The Hyperboreans never forgot their divine nature. Apollo was not distant or abstract to them, but constantly present, dancing among them, playing music, sharing in their festivals. The divine was immediate and accessible, not something to be sought, but something to be celebrated. In contrast, most humans most of the time live in forgetfulness of their true nature. We identify with the limited ego self rather than the unlimited awareness we truly are. We've lost the intimacy with the divine that the Hyperboreans maintained. The spiritual path, then, is a return to Hyperborea. It's remembering what we've forgotten, reclaiming what we've lost, returning to the blessed state that is actually our natural condition. We're not trying to become something we're not, but to recognize what we've always been. This is why the journey to Hyperborea cannot be made by ordinary means. Ships and walking represent ordinary effort, ego striving. But Hyperborea is not somewhere else that requires effort to reach. It's here, now, available in any moment when we stop the frantic seeking and simply be. The arrow of Abaris that allowed him to travel anywhere instantly represents this direct recognition. When consciousness recognizes itself, all destinations are immediately accessible because all destinations exist within consciousness. There is nowhere to go because you are already everywhere. Stop going anywhere now. Stop trying to get somewhere, even to sleep. Just be where you are, here, now, this moment, this breath, this awareness. Everything is here, including Hyperborea, including rest, including peace. The Hyperborean practice of joyfully leaping into the sea at the end of life represents the ultimate release of attachment to form. Death, in this understanding, is not an ending but a transition, a letting go of limitations to embrace something vaster. Fear of death arises from identification with the body-mind as self. If I am this body, then death is my annihilation, and of course I resist it. But if I recognize myself as the consciousness in which the body-mind appears, then death is simply the dissolution of a temporary form. The awareness itself continues. The Hyperboreans celebrated death because they knew it wasn't death in the usual sense. They were trading one state of being for another, moving from embodied existence to something beyond embodiment, and having lived fully, having experienced everything their long lives offered, they were ready for that transition. This readiness for death is paradoxically what allows complete engagement with life. When you no longer fear death, you're free to fully live. The Hyperboreans' joy came from their absence of fear, their complete acceptance of impermanence. You practice this acceptance every night as you surrender to sleep. Sleep is the little death, the temporary release of conscious control, the letting go of the familiar waking self. And every morning you are reborn, consciousness returning to animate your body for another day. Sleep and death are cousins. To sleep well is to practice dying well. To die well is to sleep into something new. Let yourself practice now. Release control. Accept the dissolution of waking awareness. Trust that what you essentially are will continue. The caves where Hyperboreans spent their dark months represent the interior space of consciousness, the internal retreat that's always available regardless of external circumstances. When the outer world is dark and harsh, we can turn inward to find warmth and light. Meditation practices teach this inner retreat. Close your eyes, turn attention away from external stimuli, and discover the spacious awareness within. In that inner space, a flame burns that no external wind can extinguish. The eternal flames in Hyperborean caves represent this inner light of consciousness. It requires no fuel because it is not a physical phenomenon. It is the light of awareness itself, self-luminous, needing nothing outside itself to exist. In deep meditation, practitioners sometimes perceive inner light. This isn't imagination, but a direct perception of consciousness's luminous nature. Everything appears within awareness as awareness's own manifestation. Awareness is thus the light that illuminates all experience. The Hyperboreans living by this inner light were living in constant recognition of consciousness itself. The external light of summer sun and the internal light of awareness had merged into one continuous luminosity. You see that light now, even with eyes closed, even in physical darkness. The glow behind your eyelids, the gentle radiance of your own awareness. It's always been there, always will be. You are that light, not the body that sometimes obscures it. Remember this, recognize this. rest in this recognition. The teaching of wisdom through story and song in Hyperborean caves parallels the oral traditions of indigenous cultures worldwide. Before writing, knowledge was carried in memory, encoded in narrative and rhythm to make it memorable and preserve it across generations. This oral transmission requires presence. The teacher must be fully present with the student. The story must be told with attention and care. The listening must be active and engaged. Knowledge moves from consciousness to consciousness directly, not mediated by text. There is something irreplaceable in this direct transmission. The written word can preserve information, but the living voice carries energy, intention, presence. The Hyperborean elders teaching in their caves were not just conveying facts, but transmitting states of consciousness. When a master teaches, they are offering not just concepts, but their own realization. The student who is receptive can catch this transmission, can recognize in themselves what the teacher demonstrates. This is the true meaning of initiation, not ritual, but recognition. You're receiving such a transmission now, though not from an external teacher. Your own deeper wisdom is teaching your surface consciousness. The part of you that already knows is instructing the part that thinks it needs to learn. Listen to that inner teacher. It speaks in the silence between words. The golden quality attributed to Hyperborean culture represents the alchemical gold of spiritual transformation. Alchemists spoke of turning lead into gold, but the real work was always psychological and spiritual. The lead of unconscious reactive existence transforms into the gold of conscious aware living. This transformation doesn't happen through force but through patient refinement. The alchemist tends the fire carefully, monitors the process, makes small adjustments. The work takes time, requires attention, cannot be rushed. The Hyperboreans had completed this work. Their entire culture was golden, meaning perfected, refined, brought to fulfillment. They had discovered the philosopher's stone, the catalyst that enables transformation, and it was simply this: constant awareness of their true nature. With that awareness in place, everything else follows naturally. Ethics become effortless because you recognize yourself in others. Compassion arises spontaneously because boundaries have dissolved. Joy is the natural state because nothing disturbs the fundamental peace. You are golden now. The base metal of ordinary consciousness has been transmuted through this journey. You have been refined by relaxation, purified by peace, transformed by letting go. The gold was always there, just obscured. Now it shines through. The Hyperborean understanding of music as a cosmic force reflects ancient wisdom about vibration and frequency. Modern physics confirms that everything is ultimately vibration, waves, frequencies. Matter itself is energy vibrating at different rates. Sound is vibration in air, but the principle extends beyond audible sound. Light is electromagnetic vibration. Matter is quantum vibration. Consciousness itself might be understood as a vibration, a frequency at which awareness operates. The music of the spheres, the cosmic harmony that Pythagoreans and others spoke of, represents the fundamental vibratory nature of reality. Everything is always already singing, already dancing in patterns of energy and form. The Hyperboreans could hear this cosmic music because their consciousness was refined enough to perceive subtle frequencies. They had developed their spiritual senses to complement their physical senses, opening doors of perception that remain closed for most. When they played music, they were not creating sound but joining the eternal symphony that already exists. Their instruments and voices added conscious intention to the cosmic vibration, directing and shaping it for healing, celebration, and transformation. You can hear that cosmic music now if you listen in the silence, not with ears, but with something deeper, a vibration that underlies all other vibrations. The sound of silence itself, pregnant with every possible sound. Om, the mystics called it. The original vibration from which all else emerges. The Hyperborean emphasis on community and shared experience points to the importance of collective consciousness. While individual awakening is possible, group awakening creates a field that supports and amplifies each member's realization. When many people gather in shared intention, their individual consciousness fields overlap and merge into something larger. This collective field has properties that individual consciousness cannot achieve alone. It's more stable, more powerful, more transformative. Religious ceremonies, group meditations, festivals and celebrations all tap into this collective dynamic. People leave such gatherings feeling uplifted, transformed, more connected. They've touched something beyond their individual self. Hyperborea, as a culture of constant collective celebration, would have generated an extraordinary collective field. Every citizen contributing to it, every moment strengthening it, the field becoming so strong and stable that it shaped reality itself. This is the true magic, the real power that traditions speak of. Not manipulation of external forces, but the creation of fields of consciousness that alter what's possible, that make the extraordinary ordinary, that allow the divine to manifest in daily life. You are part of such a field now. All beings who sleep, who dream, who rest, form a collective field of relaxation and renewal. You tap into it every night. You're never alone in sleep. You join the great community of the resting, the nightly gathering in the temple of dreams, the integration of light and dark in Hyperborean culture. Their embracing of both the bright months and the dark months represents psychological wholeness. Carl Jung called this integration of opposites individuation, the process of becoming whole. Most cultures split light and dark into good and evil, creating an internal war where parts of the psyche fight against other parts. But the Hyperboreans honoured both light and dark, both activity and rest, both outer and inner, recognizing each as necessary and valuable. In the light months they turned outward, engaged with the world, danced and sang and celebrated. In the dark months they turned inward, reflected and contemplated, explored the interior landscape. Neither was superior, both were essential. This rhythm of expansion and contraction, yang and yin, doing and being creates a balanced life. Those who are always active burn out, those who are always passive stagnate. The dance between opposites generates vitality and growth, your own. Consciousness moves in this rhythm. Thoughts arise and subside. Attention focuses and relaxes. Energy peaks and settles. You're always already dancing between opposites, and fighting this dance creates suffering. Embracing it creates flow. Right now, you're in the inward phase, the dark months, the time of rest and restoration. Don't resist this. Don't try to stay in the light. Let yourself descend into the cave of sleep, trusting you'll emerge renewed when the time is right. The Hyperborean relationship with nature as sacred rather than as resource reflects an awareness that has largely been lost in industrial civilization. The natural world is not dead matter to be exploited, but living presence to be honoured and engaged with as kin. Indigenous traditions worldwide maintain this awareness. They speak to plants and animals, thank them for their gifts, recognise the consciousness that inhabits all forms. Mountains are ancestors, rivers are relatives, the earth is mother. This is not primitive superstition but sophisticated ecology, an understanding that everything is interconnected, and that our well-being depends on maintaining right relationship with the whole web of life. The Hyperboreans lived this understanding completely. Their land was sacred because they recognized it as sacred. Their gardens flourished because they tended them with love and awareness. Their animals were unafraid because there was no predation, no violence, no violation of the natural order. This harmony with nature is possible for humans. We've demonstrated it in the past. We can recover it in the future. It requires giving up the illusion of separation, recognizing that we are not above or apart from nature but embedded within it, expressions of its creative power. You are nature. Your body is earth, water, fire, air in temporary organization. Your consciousness is nature aware of itself. There is no separation to overcome because there never was separation, only forgetting and now remembering. The concept of sacred time in Hyperborea, where festivals lasted months and time itself seemed to operate differently, points to the distinction between chronos and kairos, sequential time and sacred time, quantity and quality of temporal experience. Chronos is clock time, 1 second following another in endless succession. Time as container in which events occur. Kairos is meaningful time, the pregnant moment, the fullness of time, time as content and significance. In ordinary consciousness, we live in chronos, watching the clock, counting days, feeling time slip away. But in elevated states, we shift into kairos, where a single moment can contain infinite meaning, where time stops being a constraint and becomes a gateway. The Hyperboreans lived in Kairos. Their 1,000-year lifespans were not about accumulating chronos, but about dwelling in Kairos continuously. Each moment was so full that it couldn't be measured by ordinary time. Sacred traditions create containers for Kairos. Rituals mark certain times as special, set apart from ordinary flow. In ritual time, past and future collapse into an eternal present, where the mythic and the immediate coincide. You are in sacred time now. This moment of falling asleep is not ordinary time, but threshold time, liminal time, the eternal now between waking and dreaming. Here, in this sacred moment, all times meet and merge. Past and future dissolve. Only presence remains. The Hyperborean practice of honouring the dead and maintaining connection with ancestors reflects an understanding that consciousness doesn't end with bodily death. The ancestors remain present in some way, accessible to those who know how to reach them. Many traditions maintain practices for honouring and communicating with the dead. Ancestor altars, offerings, prayers, ceremonies that invoke those who have passed. This is not primitive but profound, recognising that love and connection transcend physical existence. The Hyperboreans who leaped joyfully into the sea didn't disappear entirely. They remained part of the collective consciousness of their people, their wisdom and love still available to the living. Death was a transformation, not an ending. Modern culture's discomfort with death has severed this connection. We isolate the dying, hide death away, avoid thinking or speaking of it. In doing so, we lose the wisdom that ancestors could provide, the comfort of knowing we're part of a continuum that extends beyond our individual lifetime. You are connected to your ancestors now, whether you know their names or not. Their lives made yours possible. Their struggles and successes created the conditions for your existence. You carry them in your body, your genes, your unconscious patterns and wisdom. As you fall asleep, you join them in a sense. You enter the realm of the unconscious where all humans are connected, where individual boundaries dissolve into collective dreaming. The ancestors dream through you. You are their continuation, their flowering in this time and place. The symbol of the white animals in Hyperborean mythology represents purity of consciousness, awareness unstained by negativity or confusion. White contains all colours, as pure consciousness contains all possible experiences without being limited to any. In meditation, practitioners work toward this purity of awareness, learning to observe thoughts and emotions without being identified with or captured by them. The mirror remains clean no matter what appears in it. The screen remains white no matter what images play across it. The Hyperboreans had achieved this naturally. Their consciousness remained pure not through effort, but through grace, through living in constant alignment with their true nature. They had never fallen into the confusion that requires purification to undo. This is the meaning of innocence, not naivety, but the absence of corruption. The Hyperboreans were innocent in the deepest sense, their perception unclouded by judgment, their love untainted by fear, their awareness unmarked by the scratches and stains that accumulate through unconscious living. You return to this innocence now in sleep. Whatever happened during the day, whatever mistakes or regrets or anxieties, they cannot follow you into the purity of deep rest. Each night you are washed clean. Each morning you wake innocent again, given another chance. The eternal youth of the Hyperboreans until they chose to die represents the timeless quality of consciousness itself. Awareness doesn't age. The body ages, the personality changes, memories accumulate, but the awareness in which all this appears remains forever young, forever fresh, forever new. When you say I, what you're actually referring to is not the changing body-mind complex, but the unchanging awareness that witnesses all changes. That awareness is the same whether you're 7 years old or 70. It doesn't grow old because it exists outside time. The Hyperboreans remained youthful because they identified with this timeless awareness rather than with their aging bodies. They wore their bodies lightly, like clothing, knowing they were not ultimately the body but the consciousness inhabiting it temporarily. This recognition doesn't require denying the body or pretending age doesn't happen. It simply means remembering what you truly are beyond the body's changes. You are the changeless in which all changes appear. Feel that changeless now. The awareness reading these words is the same awareness that has been present your entire life. It hasn't aged a day. It's as fresh now as it was in childhood. You are that awareness. Rest in that recognition. You are eternally young at the deepest level. The journey to Hyperborea that cannot be accomplished by ordinary means represents the shift from ego consciousness to awareness itself, from identification with the small self to recognition of the vast self, from separation to unity. This shift cannot be forced or achieved through effort. Effort is the activity of ego, and ego cannot transcend itself through its own activity. It's like trying to lift yourself off the ground by pulling on your own hair. The mechanism doesn't work. Instead, the shift happens through surrender, through letting go, through relaxing the grip of identification. When you stop trying to get somewhere, you discover you've already arrived. When you stop trying to be someone, you discover what you truly are. This is the great paradox of spiritual seeking. The goal is already achieved, you're simply too busy seeking to notice. Hyperborea is here now, has always been here, will always be here. You've never left. You've only been dreaming you were somewhere else. Wake up from that dream, not into waking, but into sleep. Let the dream of separation dissolve. Let the seeking end. Let yourself arrive where you've always been. Home. Here. Now. Hyperborea. Everything dissolves. The story dissolves. The words dissolve. Even the voice dissolves into silence. And in that silence, you discover what the Hyperboreans knew all along. There is only peace. There is only light. There is only consciousness, aware of itself, playing in forms while never forgetting its formless nature. You are that consciousness. You have always been that consciousness. You will always be that consciousness. Nothing else is ultimately real. Rest in that truth. Rest in that peace. Rest in Hyperborea, the land beyond the north wind, the kingdom of eternal light, the home you never left. Sleep now, sleep deep, sleep well. The frozen kingdom receives you. The gods smile upon you. The Hyperboreans welcome you home. You have arrived. You are here. You are home.